Well, hey, everybody, welcome to our next episode of the Future of Work webcast here on ChangeNerd. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have a very special guest, Lindsay Putzer. And I don't know why I don't know how to pronounce your last name better since we've known each other for so long. But Lindsay is the VP of People at Curology. She and I had the opportunity to work together at Great Place to Work. And Lindsay is what I would consider an expert in the arena of enabling high performance through people. And we're going to have an interesting conversation today about how do we really balance people and technology, and how do we ensure that we're maintaining culture through growth. So Lindsay, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's awesome to see you.
Yeah.
So first question for you. So as you're thinking about this balance between technology and people, right? How do we make sure that we have a good balance as we're growing our workforces and really trying to focus on creating high performance cultures?
Yeah, well, I think obviously there's so much out there in terms of technology, HR technology tools. I think anybody that's probably in the HR field gets multiple emails a day from all of the different vendors that are currently, creating some pretty interesting and unique types of software tools and technology tools for us to use. So I think for me, the most important thing I think about is that like technology should be a tool. And culture is about people. It's about how we interact. Us being the best that we can be at work, no matter what role we're in, is about ourselves. It's not about the technology. So I think any technology that we decide to bring in should be about enabling people to be their best, people to collaborate, us to get the results that we're trying to get. And in that way, I think technology can be super helpful as long as it's chosen smartly and it doesn't overwhelm that initial purpose, which is really for us to be able to collaborate and get results.
Yeah, and so I want to double down on one thing that you said about collaboration, and so we've heard a lot about and probably experienced Slack and instant messaging and things like that, and other tools that are supposed to enhance our collaboration. How have you seen in organizations that you've worked in or worked with where they've really been able to leverage those collaboration tools effectively?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important things is that we think about, how do we want to collaborate and how do we want to communicate and what are the best mechanisms for us to do that. So I've been in cultures where, they're meeting cultures and everybody is pretty much in meetings for 9 hours a day, 8 or 9 hours a day. And it's just back to back to back to back. And that can be healthy in some ways if that's our best way of getting results. I've been in other organizations where Slack is super heavy, and that's actually definitely true here at Curology, where a lot of our communication, a lot of our decision making, and even kind of wrestling with pros and cons and making decisions happens on Slack versus in meetings. And I think it's always about finding the time and the place. How do we want to communicate best, and is the way that we're communicating serving our needs? So was that the best place for us to make a decision? Would it have been better if we had just gotten together face to face for 5 minutes? Or are there places where, hey, maybe there's a lot of information exchange that we have to do, and face to face isn't the best because we need to do some research and we need to attach 6 spreadsheets to this decision before we weigh all of the pros and cons. And that's probably best done in email or in preparation for the actual decision making meeting. So again, it's really just about like having the right conversations and the right debriefs and reflections about how do we want to collaborate, communicate, and make decisions. And then we can figure out, is IM or Slack or email or a face-to-face or phone call or a Slack call or Zoom or whatever it may be. Like, what are the technologies that are going to help us get the results in the most efficient and effective way?
Yeah, and do you think that has to be something that is intentional, that we're kind of thinking about ahead of time and sort of mapping out, or is it better that it is organic?
I think it's probably a mix of both, because Slack is an amazing tool. I mean, it has absolutely changed the way that I work. I remember a few years ago, and actually when we were at Great Place to Work, and Slack was kind of just becoming more popular, and we were trying to figure out as an organization, how do we use this and how does it help us work better together? And should we use it, right?
Right.
Or should people feel pushed into using this new tool? But very organically, that has become the tool of choice for a lot of different teams. I think it's really helpful just to stop and pause every once in a while when you realize that, today I'm exhausted at the end of the day because I spent 9 hours in meetings, right? Or maybe that wasn't the best decision we just made on Slack because it was not enough, not enough words to, or not enough information to make a real decision. We probably should have had some back and forth over email or done more research. So sometimes you just have to explore and iterate really organically, but then stop and pause. Another practice I think is really helpful in a meeting culture or any culture is to stop at the end of your meetings a couple minutes early and just have the whole group evaluate, how did that go? Did we prepare as well as we could have? Was that as effective as it could have been for us? And maybe sometimes would that have been better in a different format? So that we're constantly just stopping and having that honest conversation around how are we trying to collaborate, and is this the most effective way for us to do it?
Wow, it's so powerful. That whole notion of two things that it makes me think about. So one is you're using that time where everybody's together to reflect, which is super powerful. And then the other is that you're evaluating the use of time, which is probably our most important asset
Yeah.
as we think about how we do our work. Do you find that when you do that, right, do you kind of see that, hey, the next time we have another conversation like this or try to make another decision, that iterates, that improves, and makes it more efficient?
100%.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. It cuts some time as well from trying to put together structures or trying to put together rules or trainings or things that you can make any organization like more bureaucratic anytime if you want to, but it's just those little moments that will allow us to work together better. So especially if you have, I've found different people in the room or different types of roles or people from different functions or certain leaders perhaps in the room that participate in that discussion, because people tend to listen to each other, and it's not a natural conversation to stop and say, how was that? How was that for us? Did it work? Did it not? Especially if you have, let's say, a senior leader in the room and somebody who's more junior or maybe an intern or hasn't been with the organization for very long. So for that person to see that it's an open conversation and that senior leader in particular is open and vulnerable to maybe that went really well, or maybe there's a different way that we can do that. Like it's a self-reflection and a group reflection. I've definitely seen it change behavior in small tweaks in small ways, but it's also modeling that openness in conversation and reflection and creating more of that sense of kind of shared learning, which is a big piece of culture.
Yeah, that's amazing. That notion that you are really almost creating an agile culture as you're spending time with each other. Because you're right. I mean, I remember the very first training that I ever led as a facilitator was a 3-day course on how to have better meetings.
Wow.
So was sort of a oxymoron, right? In that conversation. So that's super powerful. And then the other thing that points to is this idea of really living your values or living your culture. So as you think about this idea of the kind of ever-changing workplace, do you find that you're seeing decisions being made that are kind of shifting the organization or shifting the way that people are operating? Are you finding that happening more and more in conversations?
That's a good question. I I think so. I think those conversations, though, again, like they could be face to face, or they could be just small sort of Slack conversations. Because conversation happens in so many different types of interaction. One thing we had a good conversation actually with a group here at Curology yesterday around our employer brand, and how we want to be communicating who we are to the external world and to other potential candidates who might be really great, new employees for Curology. Um, and part of that was, who are we not? And really understanding not just what are we and what are some of the strengths of this culture and this organization, but how are we different from some other great organizations that are out there that people might consider working for, but would prefer Curology because it's a better fit for them. And one of those pieces was about, like, we are constantly iterating. We're not, the status quo is just not even part of how we do anything here. Curology is a pretty young organization. It was founded back in 2014. And we've gone from just, the founders back in 2014 to now about 470 employees and continuing to grow pretty quickly. But we definitely retain that startup feel, and that feel of, if you come in and you start here next week, you can have a major impact on how we do things. And there's no, this is how we do it, and you're going to follow the rules. We're constantly looking for better ideas in order to grow as a company and continue to be successful.
I think that's amazing, that whole idea of really focusing on obviously what you are and what you bring to the table as an employer, but maybe just as importantly, if not more importantly, who you're not. And I know we've had conversations like this at Great Place to Work as well, where we would help organizations understand that, not everybody's going to be Netflix or Google or Facebook, nor should they be. Right. And so we want to make sure that you're the best fill in the blank organization that you can be. So that's such a powerful place to come from. So speaking of culture and speaking of growing fast, right? And I think that this is an issue that a lot of organizations face as they're growing and transitioning. So how do you keep the essence of an organization as it's going through this huge amount of growth, and why does that matter?
Yeah, well, the essence is super important. And I have been part of and have worked with organizations as well that tried to change the essence as they grew, and that's much harder to do. For example, if the organization started and maybe didn't have a great culture, or was more top down than was helpful later on in the organization's growth. When you have people at the organization who kind of grew up that way and early decisions were made that way, and maybe if they were more junior at that time, their experiences of the culture are not cemented but harder to change. In terms of kind of, how do we talk to each other, how do we do things, who fits here, and so it's not that you can't change, but if you have some elements of the essence of your culture that go back to the very founding, that are who the organization wants to be and what's going to help the organization to continue to grow, those are really great to hang on to and identify kind of as soon as you can. So for example, at Curology, Curology was actually founded by David Lorcher, the CEO, who is a dermatologist, and his brother, who is the CTO, Glenn Lorcher, and their mother, who's the director of medical. So, and Nancy, their mother, is also a dermatologist. So there are some really interesting kind of founding philosophies and ideas that go back to the very beginning of the company. And they did some work just last year, actually, to try and identify what are the values of the company. They absolutely go back to that essence. So the values of the company are very simple, and the company tries to be as simple and efficient as possible as well, which is really part of the culture. But the values are humility, get stuff done, and team first attitude. So super simple, but if you talk to any one of those people, you definitely get that sense. And people come in here, and one of the things that we've heard from employees who are starting is that either those values are really inherent to kind of who they are and how they like to do work, or that people come in and they get them pretty quickly. They learn fairly quickly that having and acting from a big ego is just not really the way that things get done here. There's not a lot of political behavior, that we're always looking for the best answer, which could mean that there's some good debate from people of different perspectives, but then we look for the best answer, and nobody wins or loses in that. The company wins, the team wins. So I'd say, though, looking back to founding principles, looking back to kind of the essence of a culture, those are things that at Curology are absolutely helping us to be a successful organization now. And they're creating a good employee experience. And I would go so far as to say that they are creating a good product as well, and a good customer experience. So if we didn't have those, we would have the string to the customer experience, the string to how those have helped to create a successful organization here would be broken, and we would have to figure out another way to get to those great results and great customer experience. So I think one is just it's not as efficient to change a culture, especially if you're changing it in a way that's not as positive. Or if we had, say, managers that were hiring managers and hiring people that didn't agree with those values as well, or were bringing in different types of values, that efficiency and that really people being on board to kind of row all in the same direction and create the same kind of results that we're looking for would be just a little more difficult, I think. So I'd say like speed and results and efficiency are one really good way to look back to kind of essence and culture. As well as it's a great employee experience as well.
Yeah. And it really sets the tone. So when you think about how decisions are made, do you make those decisions, do you feel like, through the lens of those sort of three core values?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's not as explicit. And I know from prior consulting work and working with a lot of companies through the Great Place to Work, some companies are extremely explicit about what their values are and the fact that they're making decisions based on their values. I'd say at Curology, it's more implicit. We are probably going to do more work to ensure that everyone coming in here knows that these are our values. I think they would know them, but maybe they couldn't name them, right? Because we're not doing. We have a lot of work to do around kind of onboarding and putting structures into place, just given our fast growth. But I would say, as we make important decisions and model how decision making happens at the company, it's pretty often that you'll come into a meeting and you'll see that, for example, the senior leadership team is having a pretty open discussion, and not everyone necessarily agrees, but there's that kind of honest back and forth around, I see it this way, I see it this way. It's a real respect for each other and for the different perspectives and experiences that people bring. And I think it's pretty clear that it's not political, that everyone is in it for a team first kind of attitude and results first and Curology first and patient first. And it's about that disagreement isn't a bad thing at all. It absolutely is helping us to get to the best decision and respecting everyone in the process.
So that's incredible. And it's really amazing to see and to hear that as you're growing and morphing, that you're really kind of intentionally thinking about keeping that essence or those kind of core values. And it explains a lot about why that's so important. So last question, I guess, two parts to it. So I'm curious from your perspective, right, is you kind of look back at your experience and look forward. Are there any things that you're concerned about with regards to sort of the future of work and how work is changing that's impacting people?
That's a good question. And people in general, or people at Curology, would you say?
I would say people in general.
Well, I think that going back to your first question around technology, I think that's probably a good place to think about some of the concerns, in that I don't think that everyone sees technology as just a tool. I think
Mm,
it's really easy to get excited about the shiny new tool, or shiny new thing, or this is going to solve all of our problems, and forget about the human experience of it. Um, so it, in some small ways, that can really impact the employee experience as well as impacting results, because people are pouring investment into these tools that then require a lot of upkeep, and don't really get the results that you're looking for. In some cases, for people teams, I think this can lose credibility, of the people team with the larger organization, because you're spending more time on the tool than the actual result that you're trying to get. And it's not as fun if you're stuck in just maintaining tools, right?
yeah.
You're not getting the results that you really want to get. And I think that and on a broader sense as well, probably even more so with larger organizations, but maybe some of the smaller ones as well, is that people have so much faith in technology that they think that we might need more technology than we need people.
Hmm.
So investment is probably not going into the right places. I think things like layoffs can happen, um, possibly related to technology, but also just thinking through investments. I guess this is sort of a different topic around layoffs, but we do see that people are kind of over investing in growth, without thinking through kind of the ramifications of talent. How much headcount do we need? How do we want people to work together? And then later on, making drastic decisions that then can negatively impact the culture. So I worry about that sometimes as well.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think I've seen that. You've probably seen that too in organizations where they bring in this new sort of fancy technology, and it's almost as if they're trying to replace interaction or to uh, to close gaps in people processes that really should be based on interactions with people.
Yep.
And it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to make that employee experience awesome when you're replacing those interactions with people. So it's very powerful. I totally see where you're coming from. So let's take the flip side then.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it, and this could be sort of broadly in general or at Curology, what's something that you're really excited about when it comes to the future of work?
Yeah. Well, I think as we think about kind of the evolution of HR, and particularly in the Bay Area, but you see it elsewhere as well, that there's this real evolution of HR into people operations, into being like a strategic arm of the business, and being business minded, metrics minded, able to make decisions based on good data, but also very human focused, and moving away from that, HR as the rules or the police or compliance or only in the room when there's a problem, which still exists in, I think, a lot of organizations, to this sense of HR or people operations or people and culture or whatever each organization calls it, as we are here to help the business grow and be successful, and we're here to help people to grow and be successful as well. And I think it's less of an argument now that you can have a very successful business with great people in a way that people are looking forward to coming to work and getting things done and working with people they really respect and having a good time at work and leaving feeling really satisfied that I've grown as a person today and I got to interact and solve cool challenges with people that I really enjoy. That's absolutely possible, and I think the more that we evolve as an industry and as a function, the more we're able to not just convince people of that, but make it reality.
Awesome. Wow, that's very it's very powerful, and that whole notion of connecting HR to driving business results. I mean, I think we've seen it, right? When we were a Great Place to Work, those companies that were perennially in the top 20 of the top 100 places to work, that's what they did to be successful. So it's great to see that you're really feeling like that is an ongoing trend. So I'm happy to hear
Yeah.
that. Very cool. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate the conversation. If it's okay with you, I'd love to see if maybe in a year from now, we could have another conversation and look and see what's changed at Curology, and maybe explore some more about culture and the essence and how that makes organizations successful.
Yeah, I would love that. I think that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Right on, right on. Well, hey, thanks a lot for your time. Hey, everybody, thank you again for joining the Future of Work webcast here on ChangeNerd. I am your humble master of ceremonies, Anil Saxena. If you have any comments or questions, you can reach me on ChangeNerd, LinkedIn, or you can go to my website at www.cube214.com. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.